Hello, everyone. I am a couple of minutes late for starting this live feed. Thanks for being patient if you were waiting for me. Today, we are going to read Chapter 2 of Joseph M. Firestone's Fixing the Debt Without Breaking America: Austerity, the Trillion-Dollar Coin, and Ending Debt Ceiling, Sequester, and Budgetary Crises. So, let's see if there's anything I want to. I think I'll just pause for just a second there to catch everybody up on where we are. You can look at two previous live streams if you wanted to hear or listen to the preface, and if you wanted to hear chapter 1. So I'm going to break this ebook that Joe Firestone gifted to me to read aloud here on the Red Berets YouTube channel. I'm going to break it apart chapter by chapter or section by section. This way people can, even if I might actually do like a separate or another live stream back to back. We'll see how I'm doing. But I want them to be labeled as chapter 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, so that people can listen to these in digestible segments if they want to. So what I did the last live stream is I kind of let people know that I want to give a shout out to the craftivists, to the crafters, and to people who are supporting our work, and how you can, as we grow the community, we'll see how else that we can and are able to fundraise with these handcrafted berets. But for right now, our work is available on wholewashington.org. And it's also, if you visit our website, redberetsmedicareforall.com, you can, that will also link you up to the link to order them through wholewashington.org. We donate them so that the proceeds of the the real labor that it takes to craft one of these berets, which stand for solidarity. They stand for a solidarity approach to organizing for national improved Medicare for all. So a fight on all fronts strategy where we are working at all levels, growing the ground game, nourishing the grassroots, taking local actions such as writing letters to the editor, placing pressure on our elected representatives, both at the state level and the national level, doing direct actions, protests, gathering signatures for whole Washington and any other one-payer states who happen to be able to put forward single-payer state legislation and have the ability to do direct democracy ballot initiatives. And of course, always, always, always doing such things as demanding that Speaker Pelosi schedule public hearings and co-sponsor Rep. Jayapal's Medicare for All Bill 1976. So I've just named off a list. There are more than that, but that's a pretty good supporting candidates. If you're still someone who wants to either work electorally or include electoral things in your organizing strategy, because there are candidates that are doing direct actions, such as Rebecca Parson and Jason Call, just to name two. Well, and another shout out to Shahid Buttar, because he'll be at the San Francisco action demanding that Representative Pelosi meet the demands of the March for Medicare for All organized event that's happening on October 30th. Okay, so all right, that's where we're at with that. I think I'll go ahead and get started reading this. I need to find whereabouts I am exactly. Okay, yes, because we have read in two separate live streams the preface And then we've read Chapter 1, Austerity, Neoliberalism, and Fiscal Responsibility. Fiscal responsibility in this. So now we're going to read Chapter 2, the fix, the debt narrative, and counter narrative. Okay. I'll now present a counter-narrative to the neoliberal Austerian fiscal responsibility ideology by juxtaposing the primary claims underlying the narrative with my view of the modern money theory, MMT-based answers to them. I have to enter a disclaimer here, however. I'm not one of the developers of MMT, nor am I one of their graduate students. I'm a political writer who's learned much from them over the past 4 years, and who has assumed the role of helping to explain MMT to others and to apply the MMT approach to politics and fiscal policy. So the counter-narrative I'll provide in this chapter isn't one that should be viewed as an authoritative MMT construct. Warren Mosler, L. Randall Wray, Bill Mitchell, Stephanie Kelton, Matt Forstater, Scott Fulwiler, or Pavlina, oh man, I'm going to get her name wrong. His or her? Pavlina Cherneva might each put things differently and make fewer mistakes than I've probably made in presenting an MMT-based counter-narrative to the fix the debt narrative. On the other hand, my counter-narrative stands on its own, and I'm entirely responsible for any mistakes I've made, either in criticism of the fix the debt narrative or in presenting what I think is the MMT point of view in my counter-narrative. Claim and counterclaim. The Austerian claims below are all linked to MMT-based posts that critique them, and they are all juxtaposed against MMT-based claims that refute them. The paragraphs following each pair of claims summarize my version of MMT answers, and together provide a counter-narrative. Hello, Dolores. Thank you for sharing. I'm glad I see it's one of those intuitive things. Yeah, and I don't want to get too, I got to enjoy this too. But I am going to do my very best not to interrupt the reading or interject any questions or commentary. But a pause is okay to kind of look up and see who's joined. So thank you for joining, Dolores. Appreciate you. Okay. Let me reread that claim and counterclaim paragraph, okay? Because Joe outlines exactly how he's going to go over this here, okay? The Austerian claims below all are linked to MMT-based posts that critique them, and they are all juxtaposed against MMT-based claims that refute them. The paragraphs following each pair of claims summarize my version of MMT answers and together provide a counter-narrative. Okay. The government is running out of money. MMT answer: the government cannot involuntarily run out of money. The U.S. government has the constitutional authority to create an unlimited amount of money, provided Congress appropriates the spending and places no constraints on spending, such as a need to issue debt instruments when the government deficit spends, or debt ceiling limits. So all constraints on spending appropriations are purely voluntary, in the sense that they are due to congressional mandates that Congress can repeal at any time, and not to financial limits inherent in the government's authority. Having said that, the constraints mentioned are now in place, and so it is important to emphasize that even with them and without legislative changes, the executive can always create enough money to pay for whatever spending Congress has appropriated and also repay debt. Even with a Congress willfully maneuvering for default or brandishing the threat of it, the executive can still ensure that the government doesn't run out of money, even without more taxing and borrowing, because the executive can use the option of platinum coin. Oh my goodness, I'm going to pronounce this piece wrong. Platinum coin seniorage, and one method of getting around the debt ceiling. as one method of getting around the debt ceiling. Originally suggested by Beowulf some time ago, there are any number of PCS options the president can use to generate coin seigniorage profits to use for a variety of purposes. I've outlined some of them in detail elsewhere. Some PCS options stop with half a trillion coins. Some go over 1 trillion, up to 5 trillion, and still others envision very high face value coins ranging to up to 60 trillion, 60 trillion and up. For getting around the debt ceiling, coins with face values up to 5 trillion will certainly remove the need to issue further debt subject to the limit and break the debt ceiling. However, minting a platinum coin with a face value of, say, 60 trillion is also a political game changer because it results in filling the Treasury General Account, TGA, Treasury General Account, with enough in credits to make it obvious to the most concrete thinker that the government has the capacity to pay all the debt subject to the limit, issue no more such debt if it so chooses, and also spend whatever Congress chooses to appropriate for new programs to solve current problems. So issuing a $60 trillion coin removes the excuse of whether the government of the United States can afford to pay for employment programs, educational programs, infrastructure, new energy foundations, a Medicare for All program, new R&D programs, or expansion of the social safety net from the political table. Issuing that coin can and would create a new political climate, moving American politics much further to the left within the space of a few months. In short, it would dramatically illustrate the MMT counter to the Austerian deficit hawks, namely, that the U.S. government is not running out of money and cannot do so as long as it uses its authority to create more of it. Okay, so now we're going to move to the second thing that's going to have a counter narrative. The government can only raise money by taxing or borrowing. MMT answer: the government can create new money at will, so it can never involuntarily run out. The Austerian claim is false. First, the Federal Reserve, a government agency, can create unlimited money out of thin air, as the saying goes, though not for purposes of deficit spending or directly liquidating Treasury debt. But second, I've just pointed out that PCS can be used in the present legal framework to create money other than by Let me start with but second. But second, I've just pointed out that PCS can be used in the present legal framework to create money other than by taxing or borrowing. And third, if Congress doesn't want to use PCS, it can authorize the Treasury to spend appropriations without issuing debt instruments anytime it wants to take an afternoon off to get that done. So plainly, the government can raise money without taxing or borrowing it, but just by creating the necessary money while spending. Okay, so here's and then hello, Kay. So the next point that there will be a counter narrative to is we can't keep adding debt to the national credit card. MMT answer: we can if we want to. There's no limit on the credit card except the one imposed arbitrarily by Congress. Congress has placed a debt ceiling on the principal value of unredeemed debt instruments, and it has also indirectly mandated that Treasury issue debt to the public when the government deficit spends by prohibiting the Fed from lending the Treasury money. So it's only the self-imposed constraint of Congress that prevents the government from continuing to add debt to the national credit card. That's debt to the national credit card. There is nothing inherent in the international economic system or our own constitution that prevents us from adding debt as needed. And if current constraints involving debt ceilings remain in place, Treasury can still issue debt without breaching the debt ceiling. Beowulf, the blogger commenter who first proposed using high face value PCS to get by the debt ceiling, recently proposed another option to avoid breaking the debt ceiling. Another way, so this is all, I think it's all in italics or all in quotes. This is his proposal. Another way to sidestep the debt ceiling is to go the opposite extreme from 1-day maturities, issue perpetual T bonds with no maturity date, what the Brits call consols. Look at the debt ceiling law. The public debt adds up. For all outstanding debt, the face amount of the guaranteed principal. The future interest payments to be paid aren't counted. The face value amount of obligations issued under this chapter and the face amount of obligations whose principal and interest are guaranteed by the United States government. If there's no maturity date, then there's no promise to repay principal, and thus there's nothing to add to the public debt total. TSY? I don't know what that is. Could issue an unlimited amount of consols without tripping over the debt ceiling. Beowulf has more on consols if you want more detail. And so again, if you order this ebook, there's plenty of links provided here that you can click on if you want it for. So if I wanted to go into has more on consoles, I could click on that link and go and explore that further. There's links all throughout here that he's provided additional sightings or sources. If you want more detail, but the possibility of using them is enough to show that the Treasury has an unlimited credit card under current legal arrangements and can use it without breaching the debt ceiling. Of course, it can't spend more than Congress has appropriated and is also required to repay debt and interest that is coming due on conventional Treasury debt instruments, but that should go without saying. Okay, we're on to the next point that will have a counterpoint. If the government borrows more money, the bond markets will raise our interest rates. MMT answer: the bond markets don't control U.S. interest rates. The Treasury can flood overnight bank reserves and float short-term debt to meet its targeted interest rates, however low they may be. The government, if Congress would let it, can even stop issuing debt subject to the limit when it deficit spends, using PCS or consols, or by Congress moving the Fed into Treasury where it belongs, in which case the bond market interest rates would become entirely irrelevant to the United States. Okay, next. If we continue to issue more debt, then our main creditors may refuse to buy it, an event that would lead us to insolvency and severe austerity. MMT answer: they'll most probably buy it for the foreseeable future, but if they don't, then we won't be forced into solvency because we can always create the money we need to meet our obligations. Our creditors all want export-led economies. This means that they must accumulate dollars because the U.S. is where the consumption power is. And if they want to keep exporting, they must keep the American consumers' business. Their dollar surpluses can sit idle in their Federal Reserve accounts or be used in a way that makes them money. Buying our debt makes them some money, however little it may be at current interest rates. Buying our goods and services reduces their trade surpluses with us and goes against their export-led policies. Selling our currency weakens the value of the U.S. dollar holdings they retain. In short, they have little choice other than to buy our debt instruments unless they want to share the real wealth with their own populations. Funny so few governments are interested in benefiting their own citizens, and gradually adjust trade balances with us over time. Even more importantly, as I keep repeating, we don't need to raise money by borrowing US dollars from them or anyone else. I guess that's what USD. I shouldn't assume that. That is what that is, right? Hope so. USD from them or anyone else. We can simply spend created ourselves, yes. If Congress repeals its constraints prohibiting the Fed from monetizing the debt, or if the president decides to use PCS or consols, the result of no more debt issuance, along with use of these other methods, would be paying off the national debt over time without austerity. So, if we care so much about the high national debt levels, then why don't we do that? Could it be that the Austerians want austerity for political rather than economic reasons, and that the fiscal sustainability responsibility justifications they give are just part of a complex fairy story they tell to avoid being candid about why they want austerity? Yeah. Next point, to which there will be an MMT counterpoint. Our grandchildren must have the heavy burden of repaying our national debt. MMT answer: we're obligated to pay all U.S. debts as they come due. But since we have an unlimited credit card to incur new debt as interest rates of our choosing, at interest rates of our choosing, or alternatively can create all the money we need to pay off debt subject to the limit without incurring any more debt, our national debt cannot be a burden for our grandchildren unless they wish to make it so by stupidly taxing more than they spend. So let's educate them well in MMT-based economics so that they never make that mistake. No U.S. generation except one has ever repaid the national debt by running budget surpluses. After the debt was paid off in 1835, that generation was rewarded with the Depression of 1837. Moreover, each time the nation ran substantial surpluses for a period of time, the country fell into depression or recession. Most recently, the recession of 2001, following President Clinton's 4 years of running a surplus. It's a bad idea to repay the national debt by running surpluses because taxing more than a government spends destroys net financial assets, NFAs, in the private sector, unless one also exports more than one imports and so gains NFAs from abroad. So, provided we continue to run a trade deficit, our grandchildren won't run surpluses for long because if they won't have sufficient financial assets to have an economy that works. Okay, let me just start that sentence again. That's okay. So, provided we continue to run a trade deficit, our grandchildren won't run surpluses for long because if they won't have sufficient financial assets to have an economy that works for them. Okay. They may not issue debt subject to the limit while deficit spending, but that's possible only if Congress repeals the constraints on Treasury issuing bank reserves when the government deficit spends, or alternatively, the government freely uses its PCS power. In both cases, the national debt can be repaid without requiring that tax revenues match or exceed government spending. In any event, our grandchildren will not have the burden of repaying the national debt if they are wise enough not to run surpluses. If we are silly enough to attempt to pay it down or pay it off by running surpluses and practicing austerity ourselves in the misguided belief that we will somehow lessening the burden on them, then they will have the very real burden of growing up in poor families, attending very poor schools, living in malintegrated communities where they'll be subject to crime and violence, and living in a class-ridden nation run by a kleptocratic elite that monopolizes both the artificially constricted supply of financial wealth and the increasingly scarce real wealth produced by a stagnant, broken economy. That's not what any of us want, but that's what the Austerian deficit hawk policies of neoliberalism are producing. I can't emphasize this last point enough. Austerity isn't moral, it's immoral. It kills, and it eventually impoverishes most people, including our grandchildren, both those who are now living and growing up in difficult economic circumstances and those yet unborn, who will be born and will grow up in a stagnant economy, crippled by attempts to reduce the national debt at the expense of full employment and lose output for years on end. Next point. There is a deficit debt reduction problem for the federal government that is not self-imposed. I'll just read that again. There is a deficit debt reduction problem for the federal government that is not self-imposed. MMT answer: all together now, there is no such problem. Since the US government has no limits other than self imposed ones on spending or borrowing, the level of the national debt or the debt to GDP ratio don't affect the government's capacity to spend congressional appropriations at all, even if they do affect the political context in such a way that it undermines the government's political will to cope with economic crises and use its power to manage the economy properly. Debt and deficit numbers aren't related to fiscal sustainability or responsibility in nations like the US with a non convertible fiat currency, a floating exchange rate, and no debts denominated in a currency it doesn't issue. Such nations can't become involuntarily insolvent because they can always create more currency or bank reserves to pay debts denominated in their own currency. If the debt to GDP ratio were 300% and there were no other changes in current policy, the US would still have the same ability to deficit spend it has now. Conversely, if the debt to GDP ratio were 10%, the same would apply. To put this simply, the size of the public debt subject to the limit and the size of the debt to GDP ratio have no impact at all on our capability to deficit spend because we can always make the money we need, if need be, through PCS. So there is no need for a long-term deficit reduction plan to lower the debt to GDP ratio. There is also no need to run surpluses to decrease the size of the debt, since we can always use profits from the PCS to do that without either borrowing more or raising taxes. Even though neither the level of the national debt nor the level of the debt to GDP ratio creates a sustainability problem for the US, depending on the conditions, the deficit itself can be too high. But the question of when a deficit is too high isn't an issue of fiscal sustainability in the sense that we can run out of money, but instead is an issue of other negative consequences of an excessively high deficit. The most important of these consequences is demand pull inflation. And when that is observed, federal spending should be reduced to control or eliminated. However, there are two questions arising here. First, which spending, if cut, will produce the most overall benefit? And second, what's the impact of cutting spending versus the impact of doing nothing versus the impact of raising taxes? Neither of these questions is easy to answer without much better projection models than we have today. For example, CBO in its present state doesn't have the mandate, the theoretical capability, or the modeling technology to make such projections accurately. We stand for National Improved Medicare for All. It's a symbol of solidarity for National Improved Medicare for All, and also building a solidarity multi-pronged approach to organizing. So in other words, we are building a strategy whereby we understand that there's not a clear demarcation. The construct of saying some people are state organizers and some people are national organizers is in our overwhelming, a lot of our experience is actually a false construct. Every organizer that I know, including myself and many in whole Washington, as well as other states that are working at the state level on their own legislation, are some of the most dedicated organizers, also doing actions for National Improved Medicare for All. So if we continue to silo and separate out organizers who are doing things such as direct democracy ballot initiatives and growing community, we would in fact be losing half or more of our organizing ground game. So organizing at the state and local level is in fact bringing people into the Medicare for All community. Yes, that is correct. So, Medicare for all, single payer system, but it is a symbol of solidarity. So this means that we are all fighting on all fronts. Everybody is understanding that we need to cover every single person in this country with a single payer system. It's just the question of how do we get there, and we don't know that yet. We're working on all fronts to get there. So single payer solidarity, yeah. And why would we ever throw good organizers who are out doing direct democracy and willing to organize and be outside their representative office demanding hearings? I'm talking specifically about whole Washington, but I'm sure that there's many, many other good organizers in, among New York Health Act, people organizing in California, Maine, and again, not to leave anybody out. There are many people that are organizing for state legislation who are among the most adamant and dedicated organizers and supporters of National Improved Medicare for All. So solidarity is the key. We can share MMT. We can learn MMT. We can share the message of MMT, and that does not preclude us organizing on every level to try to open the floodgates for the United States of America. Okay, so back to Joe Firestone's book. And we're still working on these false points and the MMT counterpoints, and of which I have sort of lost the thread for what we're refuting here. What was it? It was, so we're reading, the point was there is a deficit debt reduction problem for the federal government that is not self-imposed. And we had given the MMT answer. And we're a little ways into this. Okay, I'll start here. I think this is right. More often than not, CBO's projections are a joke even 2 years out, much less 10. Oh, right, that's right. We don't have the projections, the models to project, unfortunately, yet. So more often than not, CBO's projections are a joke, even 2 years out, much less 10 or 25 years out. Given their track record, it is truly amazing that people in the Washington, D.C. village take them so seriously. It is a little game the villagers play. Congress asks CBO to develop projections of the fiscal impact of policies it is contemplating. So, of course, every time one can cite CBO projections as information that must be taken seriously. After all, if the results of their work were of no value, then why would Congress have asked for them? And why would they require that legislation they're contemplating show a 10-year deficit neutrality projection before they pass it? Unfortunately for most Americans, the self-validating nature of the authority attributed to CBO projections is being used by the Austerians to support truly horrific projections about the future financial state of entitlement programs. The standard game is to take CBO projections as a starting point and then extend them to time horizons far beyond those used by CBO itself. The results are meant to be alarming, but if one understands the game going on and the arbitrary nature of both the original CBO projections and their extensions by various Washington think tanks playing the deficit terrorism game, then they are laughable, a product of atheoretical trend projections, whose assumptions are internally inconsistent or inconsistent with basic macroeconomics. Let me pause again for a second here. Hello, thank you for joining. Okay, our next point that there will be a counterpoint to. The federal government is like, sorry, I was just wondering if I should be saying the next falsehood. But for those that are newly joining, this chapter, which is chapter 2, is, Joe Firestone is showing, these austerity myths and then making the MMT counterpoint to them. And that's how this chapter is sectioned. So here's the point. There will be a counterpoint too. The federal government is like a household, and that since households sacrifice to live within their means, government ought to do that too. MMT answer: no, The federal government is not like a household. Households can't make their own currency and require that people use the currency to pay taxes. Households can run out of money, but the US can't ever run out of money as long as Congress decides to appropriate spending and gives the executive authority to implement that spending. So, the federal government doesn't have to sacrifice to live within its means, since its means to create new currency is limited only by its own decisions and not by any factors external to it. Put simply, federal spending, including deficit spending, doesn't cost anything in the doing. The only relevant question is its real effects on the economy. So here comes our next point. We should also find a bipartisan solution to strengthen Social Security for future generations. MMT answer: Social Security has no fiscal problems. The Social Security crisis is a phony one, so no solution to this non-existent fiscal crisis, bipartisan or partisan, is needed. What is needed is a solution to the political problem of getting Social Security's funding guaranteed in perpetuity. Again, this Austerian claim assumes that Social Security funding is a fiscal problem and that the program needs to be strengthened by making it fiscally sustainable. But that claim is what is at issue, apart from the fact that it isn't obvious that a bipartisan solution to a fiscal problem would produce a real solution. It is also true that this is a fake fiscal problem. Social Security should be strengthened, all right, but the way to strengthen it is to guarantee its funding in perpetuity and to greatly increase benefits for many seniors whose current benefits leave them scraping the poverty line. Try doubling Social Security benefits while providing full payroll tax cuts for employers and employees. That will strengthen Social Security and the U.S. economy as well. Next point to be refuted. We face a crushing burden of federal debt. The debt will soon eclipse our entire economy and grow to catastrophic levels in the years ahead. MMT answer: This is total nonsense because federal spending is costless to the government. If the debt subject to the limit bothers the neoliberal Austerians so much, they ought to be supporting full payoff of the debt using PCS profits. Doing that won't harm the economy, and it won't cause inflation either, since the bonds retired are more inflationary than the money paid to redeem them. I'm getting some of this, quite a bit, but it's I'll just probably have to read it a couple of times, or I'll have to go through and bookmark like what I need for Joe Firestone to explain in even more layman terms. Although I think a lot of this is really clear. It's just, but I'm glad I'm reading it. And thank you, Joe Firestone, for giving me permissions to read this aloud and to share this and learn. Okay. Next point we are making. All right. The United States is in danger of becoming the next Greece or Ireland. MMT answer: Greece and Ireland are users of the euro, not issuers of it. So their supply, I have to just ignore that. Sorry. So their supply is always limited, and that's why they can run out of euros. The US is the issuer of dollars, and so its supply of dollars is limited only by its desire to create them. And that's why it can't become Greece, Ireland, or any other Eurozone nation. That needs to stop. I can't read that well. I apologize. There we go. Okay, this one is a real laugher. Greece and Ireland can run out of euros. California can run out of dollars, but the United States can't run out of dollars. Japan can't run out of yen. The UK can't run out of pounds, and Canada and Australia can't run out of Canadian or Australian dollars. So governments like California, Michigan, Wisconsin, etc., can become the next Greece or Ireland if the federal government allows that to happen by refusing to bail out states if they need it. But the US can't become the next Greece or Ireland because it can always bail itself out if it chooses to do so. Ah, that's nice. I'll read this comment here. Crowded Crow says, I'm seriously digging this even more than I would have expected, and I'm actually processing what you're saying. So thank you. Thank you. I'm actually processing some of what I'm reading as well. So, yeah, so I'm glad I'm reading it. Okay. The real danger for the US is in becoming the next Japan and losing a decade of economic progress by following neoliberal deficit reduction doctrines. The US is now 5 years into the decade we are losing. Why are we losing it? Now, remember, this was written some time ago, but obviously we're still completely like nothing really. I mean, I guess this is a question that I would ask Joe Firestone the next time, but I think that nothing has changed. I think this was written in 2013, and I might have that a little bit wrong, but that's I might have that wrong. Don't quote me on that. But it is some years old, but it just doesn't seem to me that anything has really changed. It seems probably as though it could have, in many ways, just in terms of what our federal government and the propaganda that they continue to perpetuate around this is just absolutely exactly the same. I said I wasn't going to pause and interject any of my assumptions. Sorry about that. Okay. The real danger is Japan. Okay, the US is now 5 years into the decade we are losing. Why are we losing it? As Warren Mosler, and I apologize, I don't know if it's Mosler or Mosler. I think it might be Mosler. So Warren Mosler is fond of saying, quote, because we fear becoming the next Greece, we continue to turn ourselves into the next Japan, end quote. That is, we're making ourselves a stagnant economy by imposing fiscal austerity rather than spending the money we need to solve our increasingly serious national problems. Here's our next point. Fiscal responsibility means stabilizing and then reducing the debt to GDP ratio and achieving a federal government surplus. I'm going to read that again. Fiscal responsibility means stabilizing and then reducing the debt to GDP ratio and achieving a federal government surplus. MMT answer: no. Real fiscal responsibility is fiscal policy intended to achieve public purposes while also maintaining or increasing fiscal sustainability, viewed as the extent to which patterns of government spending do not undermine the capability of the government to continue to spend to achieve its purposes. So the real government fiscal responsibility problem is not the problem of everyone sucking it up and responsibly accepting austerity. It is not targeting the debt to GDP ratio and managing government spending to try to stabilize it. Instead, it is the problem of people facing up to the need to use fiscal policy to stop our out of control economy from ruining the lives of any more Americans. This means that the real solution to the real fiscal responsibility problem is for our leaders in Congress and the executive branch to remove fiscal constraints and use the fiscal power of the federal government to fund solutions to the many national problems we face, starting with creating full employment and a real universal healthcare system in which no one is shut out or forced into foreclosure or bankruptcy by medical bills, and then all the other serious problems we face, but now will not handle because we claim a non-existent fiscal incapacity of the federal government. There is no incapacity. We have not run out of money. We have only run out of smarts, morals, will, and courage. We need to get those back and do what must be done to reclaim the future for working Americans. Next. Federal government austerity will create jobs. MMT answer: right. Show us one case where that's sarcasm. I was like, right. Okay. So, right, show us one case where austerity is working. Well, let's see. We've got austerity now in Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Baltics, and of course, Greece among nations in the Eurozone. Well, I think that's a good question. Oh, good. Kay's in here. Kay and Dolores probably. Oh, Joe Firestone's in here. Oh, good. Like I don't need to answer any questions that I don't know how to answer because this is my I've read a good portion of Stephanie Kelton's book now, but this is kind of I'm very new to learning MMT, so I don't feel comfortable answering questions. But let me read Joe Firestone's comment aloud here. Marvelous, Laura. Thank you so much for reading my book. You're doing a wonderful job. By the way, feel free to comment as you go. I do that when I read from the work of Stephanie Kelton. And I will ask you on the next live stream to help me not say Pavlina's name completely incorrectly. I didn't do justice to that at all. That's okay. Okay, but I'm glad you said, Joe, on the last chapter, when I had to put a pause on it, that I was really going to enjoy the next chapter, and I am. Even though I was like, right? What's right about that? Good. I enjoy the humor. That's good. Okay, where are we? And so it's creating, okay, so let's just say, well, let's see. We've got austerity now in Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Baltics, and of course, Greece, among nations in the Eurozone and also in the UK. Is it creating jobs anywhere? Is there even one case in which the austerity will create jobs theory isn't being refuted by events? Some may think that Latvia, and again, I may say that wrong, I apologize, is beginning to recover because its unemployment rate has now fallen to 15%. But that's because 200,000 Latvians, 10% of the population, have chosen to emigrate, a particularly effective way of both leaving the labor force and lowering the rate of unemployment. I bet we could lower unemployment here too if we first ran the economy down by 30%, drove U3 up to the 20% level, and then had 31 million people leave the United States for parts unknown. Oh, austerity, will thy wonders never cease? Conclusion, saying no to neoliberal austerity. So, the importance of continuing to counter austerian propaganda coming out of the Peterson Foundation and the organizations it allies with and funds remains. We must continue to try to break through the screen of the Petersonian closed system, the Washington, New York consensus. One of the popular slogans for the Austerians is debate the debt. There's a petition website urging politicians to debate the debt. There was even a proposal demanding that the 2012 presidential candidates devote a whole presidential debate to the debt and deficit issues. That never happened since both would have promised austerity, and they wanted to do their best to fool people about that during the 2012 campaign. Obviously, it wasn't 2013. Maybe it was 2000. Anyway. But I would, just to give a shout out, it would, if this it seems like something to have a good reference to. And Joe, if you're listening or if you're still with us, maybe put your website in the link, in the comments link. Because I personally, sometimes that's the reason that I'm reading aloud, is that I can do better if I'm actually looking and reading. So if this is something maybe that you might want to go pick up, Joe Firestone's ebook, and have this available to reference and also share with people. Okay. But what is it that the Austerians want us to debate? They want us to debate how we should reduce deficits over the medium and long term by spending less and taxing more. But they most emphatically don't want to debate whether the debt deficit, debt to GDP ratio represent real problems relating to fiscal sustainability or fiscal responsibility. Put simply, they don't want us to debate whether their deficit debt problem is really a problem, either for our capacity to spend in the future, or for government solvency, or for our grandchildren. They say there's a government solvency problem and that all of us must and should suffer to solve it. MMT says that there is no solvency problem and there's no reason for people to suffer any more than they have already due to the crash of 2008. That's the debate about the debt we badly need right now. When they say debate the debt, they mean debate how we should all suffer to get rid of it. When I say debate the debt, I mean debate whether the public debt subject to the limit is a real problem or just a massive distraction from coming to grips with our real problems. I think that my debate question is clearly prior to the Austerians because it doesn't assume what it should prove, namely that there is a problem and that focusing on it isn't a distraction. But I think it is a massive distraction, and the president can prove it. Just mint that 60 trillion platinum coin, and the debt problem will go away. Then the Peterson Foundation and other agents of the emerging plutocratic elite will need to invent a new fairy tale to distract us with, or maybe they'll do all of us a favor and just go out of the propaganda business so we can rebuild our country without having to deal with their insolvency fantasy first. Oh, that's a great chapter. I really enjoyed that. And I think let's stick to the plan that we had. Does anyone want to weigh in as to whether they would like me to start a new live stream now to read the next chapter, or shall we save that and I'll announce again tomorrow or, sometime in the near future. I'm going to do this chapter by chapter, though, so that people can, read and share each of the separate links. No comment? Yes, now, unless others would prefer another time. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to start a new live stream just because this one's 52 minutes long, and I would like it to be so, it'll probably go live in about a minute or two. I'll just get up and get myself a beverage and be right back, and it'll probably be up in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone. And let's continue to build a solidarity approach to organizing national improved Medicare for all, and let's learn MMT and share the word of modern money theory truths, and we'll be doing that here further in just see you in just a couple minutes.